And Fred's background, he's University of Virginia Law School graduate. He's also graduate studies in public administration. Honors also in American history and political science. So Fred, if you join us, please.
Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon on behalf of the Guam Public Utilities Commission to speak about the role of the Guam PUC in the GPA Integrated Resource Plan. I would like to acknowledge that there are 4 commissioners present today from the Guam PUC, including our chairman, Jeffrey Johnson. I thank them for attending today also. You know, the PUC's role, really, it does loom quite large in the Integrated Resource Plan of GPA. Basically, the IRP cannot be implemented without the approval of the PUC. Under the present regulatory framework, PUC review and approval are required to ensure that the IRP is in the best interest of Guam's ratepayers. The 7 commissioners of the Guam PUC are the ultimate decision makers who will decide whether and upon what conditions the IRP will be implemented. Pursuant to Guam statute, the Guam PUC exercises regulatory oversight supervision over GPA and other public utilities. Its primary role is to assure that rates, tariffs, and charges are just and reasonable. Furthermore, under its contract review authority, the PUC reviews any contract of GPA that could increase rates, and those have been determined to be contracts over $1.5 million. Now, the PUC last undertook a review of the GPA IRP in 2008. The Guam legislature had implemented at that point certain renewable energy portfolio standards, which you've become aware of this morning. They were explained earlier. As of 2015, 5% of GPA's net electricity sales must be through renewables, and that goes up with each year. Well, in that same public law that created those renewable energy standards, the Guam legislature had determined that both the Guam Public Utilities Commission and the Consolidated Commission on Utilities are the governing bodies for electric utility rate and policy. So that kind of began the role of the PUC in reviewing GPA's IRP. Now, historically, out of interest, the 2008 IRP introduced renewables for the first time, and at that point, GPA had only intended to convert one of its plants, 40 megawatt Themis combustion turbine, to LNG. So certainly we've come a long ways in the LNG program that's before us now. In 2008, in the order approving the IRP, the PUC adopted integrated resource planning implementation protocols for the Guam Power Authority. These protocols required a fully transparent, competitive request for proposal process for acquisition and development of renewables, demand-side management, and conventional energy projects. GPA was required to seek approval from the PUC for all contracts related to both renewable and conventional resource development. GPA filed its current IRP with the PUC on February 15, 2013. The same protocols that were applied in 2008 are still in effect now. I'm going to focus today more on the PUC review process than the specifics of the IRP plan, because I think those have been adequately covered by some of the other speakers. The PUC had the matter reviewed by its consultants and then issued an order in July of 2013 on the IRP. Now, the PUC gave what is called a qualified approval. And to use the analogy we used at that time, it was a yellow light, proceed with caution, rather than a green light, a complete go, or a red light, stop. So basically, GPA is authorized to proceed ahead with the development of its IRP and the LNG conversion plan. But the authorization was somewhat limited, allowing GPA to proceed with its planning and development of the IRP, but subject to numerous requirements that GPA must satisfy before the plan could be ultimately approved. I think the order gave an indication of the thought process of the commissioners of the Guam PUC. As I mentioned, there was a report issued by the PUC consultants, the Loomis Consulting Group. Not surprisingly, the most important consideration for PUC commissioners appears to be the cost of conversion to LNG and the rate impact upon the ratepayers of Guam. The Commission's order found that the IRP proposal did not provide detailed information concerning how the required infrastructure changes and other costs associated with a conversion to LNG would be funded, or what the rate impact of such a plan would be on ratepayers. The PUC indicated that it could not give unqualified approval to a plan without a full understanding of how the plan would be funded. Estimates of the cost of implementation of GPA's IRP and conversion to LNG range in the area of $750 million. That's really critical for GPA to determine a funding plan for the conversion which will not cause skyrocketing rate increases. GPA had initially hoped that some of that cost could be funded through something we have on Guam called the Levelized Energy Adjustment Clause, which is the vehicle by which fuel costs for power are passed on to customers. But the PUC recently decided that it did not feel that the LEAC clause was an appropriate vehicle for funding these kind of capital improvement costs. Then GPA, in a well-prepared report by the Strategic Planning and Operations Division in October 2013, had recognized that the capital projects and IRP implementation may have to come from a variety of sources, including base rate increases, commercial paper, bonds, surcharges, and revenue funds. GPA has calculated, as you heard earlier, that the conversion to LNG will save $900 million over the next 30 years. But the question is, such savings are premised upon a huge upfront capital investment. And I think also, honestly, there's probably some questions about the calculations. You know, it may be based on fuel prices today, but what are the fuel prices going to be for LNG and RFO, for example, over the next 30 years? They could be drastically and rapidly changing. So we think that probably more analysis is going to need to be shown to demonstrate that these savings are real, not just conjectural, in the face of these worldwide price fluctuations for LNG and RFO. Furthermore, the actual cost of GPA's plan, what it calls its base rate case, is not really completely fixed at this point. So there are going to be modifications depending on when plants are retired, when new plants are built. And that's certainly another factor that could affect the savings. And finally, on the savings, there are also issues about how you calculate the net present value of the savings to determine what they actually are. The PUC in its review also felt that the basis for the IRP, which was a 2011 study, was a feasibility study only, a preliminary feasibility study. So the PUC, as you've heard earlier, is now awaiting a detailed LNG project implementation plan from GPA. The PUC order requested GPA to submit to the PUC a detailed resource implementation plan which will identify the acquisition strategy GPA intends to utilize to bring LNG resources to Guam, a detailed implementation schedule, projected project expenditures, key decision-making milestones, and the expected schedule of milestones for establishing contracts for LNG supply. The PUC also questioned whether the conversion of the bulk of GPA's generation units to LNG does actually meet the goal of having increased fuel diversity. The point is, if you only have one fuel source you're using this fuel conversion, there's a question there. But I'm glad to hear today, it's been mentioned renewables are going to play a large part in the diversity of the generation sources. The PUC had also asked GPA to consider a few other sources, such as dimethyl ether and that's DME and methanol as considerations. But initially, GPA seems to feel, based on its October report this year, that those sources may not be appropriate for them to use. In October 2013, GPA also suggested that these fuels just may technically not be feasible to use. The PUC does expect that GPA will continue its negotiations with the U.S. EPA. There are a number of serious issues there about the Rice Max standards that need to be met. GPA also requested, or rather PUC requested GPA to compile a list of LNG suppliers, and GPA has already begun that process. Of critical importance to this resource implementation plan, which we're expected to receive at the end of this month, by the way, is the resource implementation plan itself, how they're going to accomplish all these difficult goals. And the PUC really is not going to be able to proceed forward with its review until this implementation plan and cost structure for LNG conversion are presented. Another concern is the system and plant reliability. Last year, GPA did experience a number of unplanned outages. And there's some concern that in this period of changing fuel supply, when you're converting to a new fuel source, there could even be a greater possibility of disruption to the generation, transmission, and distribution systems. And the PUC will be looking for GPA's plan to make sure that reliability is ongoing and assured. The battery storage planning is a good potential aspect of that. The GPA IRP implementation strategy decision, again, which was done by the SPORD division of GPA in October, is really a very good report. I have to compliment the authors of it, John Cruz, Jennifer Sablon, and others. It talks about the number of gateways that you've heard about, the decisions that GPA has to make before it can finally implement this plan. And, you know, they're really, it's mind-boggling in a way, the number and the extent of the planning, the different decisions that have to be made on plant retirements, GPA personnel retirements, what new plants will be built, what will be retired. These are not easy decisions, but I think GPA did recognize in that report that it's really going to have to address those issues. And these will all have to be decided by the Consolidated Commission on Utilities. Another really important issue is the ownership of the new LNG supply system. Is it going to be owned by GPA? Will it be privately owned? Or maybe through a combination of the two, a special enterprise entity that would be the owner. That's a pretty major issue, and at this point, the PUC really hasn't weighed in at all or given any opinions as to how it might view this kind of an ownership issue. There are many funding decisions, as I've mentioned too, and these include the implementation of the strategy, new power plants, LNG import terminal, LNG cryogenic storage, natural gas distribution pipelines, energy storage facilities, LNG supply, regasification, and most of these, my understanding is, really haven't been finally determined by GPA. GPA has done a lot of work. They're moving in the right direction. But these are all serious issues that will have to be addressed. In the final analysis, the most important consideration for the PUC will likely be the CCU plan to manage and mitigate customer rate impacts. The CCU will need a carefully crafted plan there. Under the GPA enabling statute, it is ultimately GPA and the CCU that are responsible for managing and operating the power system. It's not the PUC. PUC manages rates. But the little twist here is that because of the complexity of the funding of all of these new LNG conversion plans and the high cost, the PUC and its consultants are going to need to carefully and closely monitor the progress of GPA in developing its final plan. Here, both the Utility and the Regulatory Commission will need to work together to ensure that the decisions that are made are in the best interest of the ratepayers. Thank you.